least get 10% of your reserves into Bitcoin and give yourself a fighting chance of resisting the onward advance and devaluation of the currency that you operate in, whether that's pounds or dollars or euros. Really, there's very little to pick between them. You need some exposure to Bitcoin.
Mark, how you doing?
Hey, good to see you, Jordan. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, thank you for jumping on. It's, we literally just met for the first time on screen about 5 minutes ago. Because, I saw a LinkedIn post that you'd put out, because everyone that listens to the podcast knows that that's the place that I kind of hang out, because it's kind of outside the echo chamber. So I saw a post that you put there around your business and how you've been getting Bitcoin and integrating Bitcoin into your business through Treasury. But I think before we get into that, I just wanted to give context around why. I think it'd be good to find out a little bit more about you, your background, and then, how did you end up starting StartBay Enterprises?
Yeah, great. Well, thanks again for having me. So most of my career has been working in charitable entities of one sort or another. I did divert into higher education, one of the university medical schools for a while, for a few years. But aside from that, and even that was charitably connected, it was part of their development office. But for most of my career, and so I'm 50 now, so you can figure out how long that has been. It's getting close to 30 years. It's all been around charitable enterprises of one or another. And so for 10 years, I was an executive at a large international development charity that works in 29 countries, helping children who live in extreme poverty. So I was there for 10 years, lots of responsibility. It's a huge, globally, a $1 billion plus organization. But then even in the UK, where I was one of the leaders, we had more than 50 million pounds of revenue. So it's quite a big operation. And so I did that for 10 years, which entailed huge amounts of travel around the world, Africa, Asia, South America. And so really eye-opening experiences, actually. And then about a year ago, March 2024, I decided I'm pushing 50. I've got 10 to 15 years of really good career and energy, at least, that I want to throw into something. And so I decided to go out on my own. I just quit. I jumped on a plane with a mate, and we found ourselves in the DRC, and we went to an artisanal cobalt mine in the DRC. I can tell you that story at some point if you like. But when I got back from that, I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to consult, and then I'm going to see over a period of time what the needs in the charitable sector are, because it's a sector that's been beaten up really badly over the last 20 years or so. And so identify what the needs are and then try and build a business out of that. And so now I have this startup. So my consulting business is StartBay Enterprises, but I'm currently evolving out something called StartBay Fractional, which is really trying to nurture talent within the charity sector to ensure that charities get the talent they need. And the brilliant people who are very passionate and committed in the charity sector also get the opportunity to broaden their experience and earn some consulting income as well as their regular day-to-day job. So that's really exciting. That's going to go live in the next few weeks. There's about a dozen consultants already working with me, and that's growing literally every day at the moment. So those are the things that I'm doing. And separately to that, I'm on the board of a few charities, 3 charities to be specific. And I've been a Bitcoiner since 2019. So I got in a few years ago now. I've done the painful first cycle. And really, it was just a no-brainer for me when I started a business just over a year ago that the company should adopt a Bitcoin standard as early as it possibly could. So I pulled together some revenue and, got myself some leeway in the business's finances. And then as soon as I'd achieved that, the next thing was to set up a Bitcoin treasury, which I know Bitcoin Collective is very involved with in different ways.
Yes, we are indeed, and that's why it caught my attention what you were doing. And but going back to the business itself, like what are you actually? That's like what got you into like the charity sector in the first place? Like how did that journey?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. So I'm an interesting mix, and my father is very entrepreneurial, and my mother is a deeply committed Christian. I'm a Christian as well, but she's very deeply sort of quite fundamental Christian. And so I'd always had this entrepreneurial spirit in my background, and also this very deep sense of the importance of doing some good in the world. And so I guess I've always leaned towards anything that brought those two things together. And so maybe a little bit frustrated in the charity sector at times because it can be a bit slow and a bit lacking in entrepreneurial energy. But where I am right now, I feel like I'm kind of hitting both of those key things. So it's really satisfying to me to be serving the charitable sector, but in an entrepreneurial way. That feels quite fulfilling to me.
Yeah. I was just you mentioned over the last, I can't remember the time period you said, but the charity sector has been, I don't want to make up a word, but what did you say? It was not struggling, but it's like been hard hit over the last.
It has, yeah.
How come? Like, can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. I'm sure there are lots of nuanced reasons that I'll miss as I try and represent this.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not speaking for the sector, but this is my observation of where the sector's at. And you only really need to read any of the sector's publications, and you quickly realize 3,000 staff being lost in this charity, or even more in some of the really large mega international charities. So all across the space, you've seen lots of layoffs. In the UK, we've seen the number of people giving to charitable institutions is going down quite significantly. And younger people are not engaging with well-established charitable institutions as perhaps previous generations were doing. And so the profile of those who do give to charities is getting older. The number of people giving to charities is going down, and there's just not the newly populated donor base coming into the sector at the moment. So the whole sector is really ripe for innovation. But I think there's more to it than that, because I don't want it to sound like the charity sector is doing something wrong specifically. I think they have been placed in a position where their job is pretty tough.
Yeah, I can imagine. Like, how do you think, like, because I imagine I'm going to switch it on to a little bit of Bitcoin here, sure, of like the charity sector. From my understanding over the years, has struggled a little bit with transparency. And do you think how do you think say Bitcoin could be then integrated, or do you think it's wise for charities to start with any Bitcoin integration or using it at all? I realize that's a very big question. The reason why I asked that is only because we're seeing a little bit here and there from so I've had Antonia Rupel on from Save the Children, and they're piloting different Bitcoin projects because I think they transfer, I think she said about $65 million around the world. I could be off on that number, but a lot of money around the world. And they're looking at using the Bitcoin rails. And then you've also got the likes of Charity Water as well, who have built the Bitcoin Water Trust, which is where all the donations they get in Bitcoin, they hold on to for at least 5 years and let it grow. It feels like that's a little bit of innovation that you were talking about that is maybe lacking in the charity space. And I don't know if you've got any thoughts on how it could or how it could impact the charity space. And I realize that's not what your business is about. But I just want to hear your thoughts as a Bitcoiner and working in that space.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think my initial observation there is that our mutual friend Joe Bryan, who made the wonderful video, What's the Problem?, which everybody should watch if they've not watched it yet, summarized the problem really well that fiat creates. And I think one of the main issues that the charity sector has is that it hasn't yet, for the most part, got to grips with what the problem is. So the charity sector, I think, is an unknowing victim of fiat currency and is being kicked around by the now increasingly violent movements of fiat currency with debasement and devaluation, and not really realizing what's happening to it. And so the fiat space is not neutral when it comes to the charity sector. It's not like the status quo is a satisfactory state of affairs for the charity sector. It really isn't. The charity sector is bleeding donors, it's bleeding value in its reserves, it's bleeding revenue opportunities, and it's also seeing a huge increase in the number of people requiring its services, because as fiat systems fail, people reach out to charities for the help that governments clearly can't give them. So you've got this toxic combination where all sorts of things are pressurizing the charity sector, and for the most part, leaders in that space, they're not economists, they don't understand what's happening in the global or macro economies. They don't even realize that what's happening is, at least in part, being caused by a fiat currency system that is making them the frog in the boiling water, so to speak, by slowly turning up the heat. And so what you find is that these organizations are full of really good-hearted people, and some of them are extremely smart people, but they're not really focusing their attention on the problem that surrounds them. Instead, they're quite rightly looking at the needs of the beneficiaries they want to serve and trying to do more, work harder, work longer hours, try and raise more funds, and yet not really realizing that it doesn't matter how fast they run, the government will just turn up the treadmill faster. And so in the end, you're going to fall off the back. And what we've seen is a consolidation of bigger and bigger charitable institutions, many of which now rely on major government grants, which is problematic, right? At what point do you become part of the government? And at what point are you actually a charitable entity? So the fiat system it's not in itself neutral. It's systemically taking away some of the effectiveness of the charitable sector. So I think there's a really important job to do in educating charity leaders about Bitcoin. The challenge we've got, and I'd love to hear what you think about this, but to me, it feels like Bitcoin is utterly revolutionary savings technology dressed up as a get-rich-quick scheme, and trying to get people over this hurdle. This is not a scam. This is not a get-rich-quick, Ponzi or whatever else you want to call it. This is actually transformational technology that will do more for your institution than you could possibly imagine if you will just give it the time to really understand the economics and the technology of it. It could save your institution. Ahead of this call today, actually, I worked out that I'd spoken to a fairly large charity in June of 2020. Now, I'd been a Bitcoin holder myself for about a year by this time. And this charity had about 5 million in reserves. So every charity is supposed to keep a certain percentage of its running costs in reserves. And that's the right and responsible thing to do. And so they had this £5 million amount in their reserves, which is fantastic. Good for them. And I'm sure that was requiring a lot of discipline and constraint to retain that level of income, when I know what they would have wanted to do was just use those funds to help their beneficiaries. However, they retained this 5 million. And I worked out this morning, if when I had the Bitcoin conversation with that charity in June 2020, they had put 10% of their reserves into Bitcoin, that 500,000 would now be in excess of 5 million. But it's not just that. It's also that the 500,000 that they kept in cash now only gets you purchasing power worth 325,000. So this is what's happening to charities who are being told you've got to keep reserves because that's the responsible thing to do. So you keep your reserves responsibly in a savings account, and look what happens.
It does all just come. When you said 2020, I was like, okay, this number is going to be big. Both ways, when you're looking at if it was transferred into Bitcoin, because it's essentially a smaller scale of strategy from what Michael Saylor did, because it was August 2020 that they had, given it was 500 million that he had that put into Bitcoin. But the important thing is like looking at it if you don't do anything, like the risk of not doing anything. And I think that's the key that a lot of charities, businesses, individuals, that's the bit that people miss and don't quite understand. Because once you understand that in 2020, your purchasing power was 500,000, now was it 340? 325. Now it's 325 in 5 years. Like, just by saying that should theoretically open the eyes of people to be like, okay, how do I protect myself? And I think that's Joe's video was great at doing that, because it's what you said as well, around at what part do different sectors become the government? And actually, like, because that's where they get a lot of their money, their capital coming from. It's really important to understand that aspect of it. Are you having any of these conversations around Bitcoin with charities, or do you how do you navigate that?
It's not really what my business is focused on. So my business is focused on providing various skills. So with the consultants I'm working with, we have a range of skills, everything from fundraising through to strategic finance and CRM development and so on. So we're focused on that primarily, but I would happily have a conversation free with any charity who wanted to understand this, not because I'm talking my book, but because I spent nearly 30 years in the charity sector. I've seen where the fiat system is taking us. And it's not only that it's damaging the charity sector, it's damaging the way we kind of interact with each other as humans. And I think this is a really fundamental problem that the fiat system has left us with that will go on for years. And so charities need to understand that the relational dynamics here are completely different in the fiat system. And the more you get into large government contracts, and I'm not saying that, charities shouldn't get large government contracts, but I think you should know what you're doing when you do that, because there's an entirely different motivation behind money that comes to you as a charitable institution that is motivated by altruism, that is given to you because somebody has maybe got more than they need for whatever reason, and they've decided that some type of need that they've experienced or witnessed is something they want to help with. And so, hey, I've got this £100, Jordan, and your Jordan.com charity, I really want to help it because I can see you're doing fantastic work and nobody's forcing me to do this. There's no coercion involved. I just love what you're doing, Jordan. Let me help you. That's a really true philanthropic spirit. There's another thing where jordansbusiness.com pays a load of tax to the government. And you pay that tax to the government because they say, hey, Jordan, if you don't pay this tax, we're going to put you in prison. And so you say, okay, I've thought about it and I'm going to pay the taxes. So here are the taxes. I'd rather keep my freedom and you can keep this percentage of my money. And now the government takes that money that you have been forced to give them and it uses them to make a grant to a charity. You see the completely different origin of funds there. One comes from a a humanitarian spirit that wants to do some good in the world, and the other comes from coercion. And what we are seeing is the expansion of the state so significantly. It is so big now compared to previous years that we are squeezing out the humanitarian spirit that actually makes us bond and build community more effectively together. I don't want to be too esoteric about all of this, but actually I think this is a really important sociological principle. When government gets that big, it takes away your ability as a community to engage effectively with each other. You can't give to charity in the way that you might otherwise be inclined to, because the government's taking all of your money. That's the reality of the situation. If you look back at the philanthropists of the 19th century, so we're here in the UK, I think we're both UK based, and back in the 19th century, most British people know about philanthropists such as Rowntree and Cadbury, and you can still today go to the Cadbury workers' houses in the middle of England there, and you can see what a great entrepreneur and businessman and philanthropist did. He built a great business, and he also had a great philanthropic endeavor that created a fantastic community that we still talk about 150 years later on. Now, it's interesting because when Cadbury and Rowntree were running their businesses, any idea, Jordan, what government expenditure was as a percentage of GDP in that time? Give me a guess.
I have
stab in the dark.
I have no idea, but drastically different to today.
Right. So it was 12%. It was 12% of GDP. And you know what that figure is today? That figure is nearly 45%. So we have almost 4x'd government spending as a percentage of GDP in that 150-year period. And so the dynamics of our society have changed. And my contention is that by participating in the Bitcoin revolution, charitable institutions have the opportunity to regain the philanthropic roots of the organizations that they represent. So to me, the status quo is actually harmful. And my contention is that by participating in the Bitcoin revolution, what you're doing is taking your charity and you're planting it alongside the likes of Cadbury and Rowntree and others who did phenomenal work in the UK and around the world 150 years ago, before government became as big as it is today. Scary numbers, I think.
That's really scary. And it's not even, that's one thing that people don't, that struggle to actually think about this, is it's not that big a time frame either that we've managed to switch from this. And it's like, when I'm introducing someone new into Bitcoin, like I just said, you realize that we've only been using this type of money for the last 50 years, just over 50 years, if you take it from 1971. And people, a lot of people that are older, say more around my parents' age, they'll still think that we're on the gold standard. And there's still a misunderstanding around that. But I really do see that just being in the Bitcoin bubble, essentially, having a Bitcoin business, like speaking to so many people in the Bitcoin community, that it is all about community. And like, that's a huge part. And it feels like that Bitcoin actually does bring that back, that element of interacting with one another and having if it's a little Bitcoin circular economy, buying local from your local farmer. And because one thing that, so I watched Clarkson's Farm.
Yeah.
I watched that on Amazon, and you see the effects. This is nothing to do with Bitcoin, but this is like, you see the effects of, I guess, government overreach when it comes to farming, and the struggles that local farmers have, and butchers as well, and slaughterhouses. They really highlighted that on this season, of how it's becoming really difficult to work within a small community now, because all of these small local places are getting bought up by larger entities, which all potentially could then stem back to government. But I don't want to just say that's the end. But I think you're right on you.
Let me give you an analogy here that I think is helpful. So, I don't know if you remember, maybe you're too young to remember, maybe 25 years ago, there was a real controversy in the British press, maybe international press. I didn't follow it internationally, obviously, but certainly in the UK, there was some controversy because I won't name the companies, but there were some large multinational companies that were caught heavily marketing formula milk to mothers in some of the poorer countries around the world. I don't know if you remember this.
I don't remember this.
Quite a big scandal at the time. And of course, what was happening was there's absolutely nothing wrong with a mother giving breast milk to a baby. In fact, now everybody would agree, if possible, it's not always possible, but if possible, that's an optimal solution, certainly for the first few weeks or months of life. But the marketing strategy of these large corporates was really promoting the use of formula milk. And, that may be okay, but it's not okay when you mix that formula with deadly water. And what was happening was these mums thought they were doing the right thing by spending money they didn't have to buy the formula that they didn't need, and then mixing that formula with really lethal water, toxic water. And of course, babies were dying because of this toxic mixture of the formula and the dirty water. And for me, Fiat is the dirty water that we don't even know what it's doing. So those mothers, they love their babies, right? They absolutely would have done anything to protect and nurture and foster the development of their babies. A baby is about as vulnerable as anybody gets in this world. And when it's your own baby, you care for that child like no other person in the world. And yet, mums, thinking they were doing the right thing, were actually poisoning their own children. And I don't want to say that, there's some nefarious actor stood with a dark hood behind the government who's deliberately poisoning the population with dirty money. Just like I don't think a single mother that fed her baby a formula with dirty water thought she was doing anything other than helping. And I think governments are using dirty money, and it's killing our community, it's killing our society, it's killing our institutions and our businesses, because we take the milk of human kindness and we mix it with fiat, and it becomes poisonous. And just like the mum wanted to help the baby, in fact, even sacrificially was helping the baby by buying something she couldn't afford. Sadly, she was actually hurting the baby. And I think let's give governments the benefit of the doubt. Let's say they don't mean to be hurting anybody. In fact, they want to do the opposite, but the result's the same.
It all comes back, as we know, it's like to the money, but it's the understanding of what that money is. Because you can put that into the context of charities as well, or you could put that in the context of businesses, or you could put that in the context of anything really, because money makes the world go round. Yeah. And it's, in my head, it's Jeff Booth that said it, who says this, and he might have got it from someone else, but it's like, if the underlying, like if at the core, the money is broken and it's corrupt, it's manipulatable. I don't know if that's a word. And then that then comes through in society and everything we do. And you have to look at the base layer and like, what is that? And like, can that be manipulated, corrupted? And this is what we're seeing. It's just now the side effects of that in society.
Absolutely. And the impact in the sector that I've worked in for a long time is so obvious to me, and yet, many people can't see that. They just don't see it. They don't have if they're not read, they've not experienced it directly, and so they can't see that. And I think it's deeply unfortunate that at the moment, many sectors, including businesses, we've seen it in the UK recently. For your international viewers, it might be helpful to explain that the government in the UK recently increased the amount of taxes a business has to pay when they employ somebody. Well, those taxes, it's inevitable. That's more resource in the government, and it's fewer jobs, and it's more costs on businesses. And so the end game there might be well intended, but the end game is still a net negative for everybody. Nobody wins out of this, not even the government. And the UK government is in pretty serious trouble at the moment. We saw just in the last 24 hours or so, the government failed to try and reduce government spending by a tiny fraction. They try to reduce it by just a minuscule amount compared to what they spend, and just got no votes. They didn't get the votes they needed, and so it got rejected. And we've seen something very similar in the US on the other end of the spectrum, where they voted for huge increases in government spending. This doesn't end well, and this is why Bitcoin is so important. And so initially, when I first got into the Bitcoin space, I was very private about it, very quiet. It was a year before I told anybody about it. In fact, it was my squash partner. I play squash once a week, and it was my squash partner he bought Bitcoin back in 2015, and he finally persuaded me in 2019 that I should buy in. So I bought some Bitcoin in 2019. I was quite private about it for a while. But I don't know how you feel about it, but as time progresses, I'm getting more and more bullish and more bold on talking about Bitcoin. And I now unreservedly would say to any organization, whether it's a charity or a business or an educational institution, you really have to look seriously at Bitcoin. Because I think Michael Saylor, who did a very influential talk back in mid 2020, said, the money you have is like a melting ice cube. And I think that's exactly right. And charities are seeing their reserves collapse in value over time, as are businesses and as are households. And so increasingly over time, my confidence has grown, and I feel much more convicted to speak openly about it. And that's why I actually shared the post, because it's a little bit of a strange thing to do, right? To you get a startup and post about what you're doing with your reserves. I've never seen anybody post about their reserves. We've got so much in treasuries, and here's a plot of when we bought it. I don't think I've ever seen that. But
it's such a when you think of it like that, it's a strange thing to be promoting as a business, because if it wasn't Bitcoin, it'd be very weird. It'd be like, oh, everyone would be like, oh, well done, like, cool. But because it's Bitcoin, and when you said there, like, you're building in confidence and you feel like you can talk about it quite a lot more. Like, I feel very much the same, but especially over the last year and a half. Just because there is a dark cloud over Bitcoin that used to be a lot darker, the perception of Bitcoin. But now, and if people like it or not, like, there is credible players coming into it, or what people perceive as credible players coming into Bitcoin. And this has really helped with the overall Bitcoin's credibility, and then people's confidence to feel like, okay, this is what I believe. I want to express that and let other people know about that. So yeah, I think I agree with you that, like, confidence is building. And it's interestingly that when you said that you're playing with a squash partner who told you about it, did you see the news about the European Squash Federation?
I did, actually, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. I think they bought Bitcoin and they hold it. There seems to be a lot of squash players that are into Bitcoin. I don't know if there's. I was with quite a few at the weekend. There must be something to do with it. But yeah, so you feel like there's more confidence, and you obviously felt confident enough to be like, okay, it's time. I want people to know that I'm buying Bitcoin for my business. Did it take quite a lot to get to that point and like actually hit publish on LinkedIn?
A little bit, because you have to be really conscious of the reputation of your business. It's not, there are other people working with me, and in terms of other consultants on my platform, and reputationally, it's important that we have integrity and a robust, strong image presented to the world, like any business. But there comes a point when you can't deny. Look, if you don't have confidence in Bitcoin, you should not have confidence in fiat. And so maybe it's just a transfer of confidence. Maybe the confidence brick by brick is moving from fiat to Bitcoin, because where else can it go? There are no other solutions that I find to be satisfactory. I've held in the past, I've held different cryptos, and I buy Bitcoin regularly, personally, and as a business. I'm not buying any other cryptos. In fact, I've been selling any other cryptos that I had to buy Bitcoin on dips, as well as adding the Bitcoin, because this is the thing that makes sense. This is the integrity in the system. This is the clean water that you can mix with anything to give to the vulnerable, and they'll thrive. And the reason I wanted to talk to you, because I thought carefully about whether or not to have this conversation with you today, as well as posting on LinkedIn. And one of the reasons I was so keen to talk to you is that I think it's really important that people understand Bitcoin is not for billionaires. It's, everybody finds the story of Michael Saylor super inspiring. It's great. But, last time I checked my business account and my personal account, there weren't tens of billions of dollars waiting to be deployed into Bitcoin. Maybe it'll change by now, but I don't think so. So it's really important that if you're a baker, or if you've got a retail store, or if you've, got a little transportation business, Bitcoin's for you, because the status quo is not neutral. The reserves that you hold for your company or your charity or your school or your university, they're not neutral, just sat there waiting to support you when you have a rainy day. They're actually being depleted. And whether or not that's by design is another matter, another conversation, but they are being depleted. And Bitcoin offers you a solution that preserves your purchasing power over much longer than anything else that we've ever had in existence. And so, yeah, in the end, you have to say, I'm in. And if I'm in, and if I'm fully in, then I ought to start talking about this, because actually this really matters for the charity sector, who are increasingly under pressure, for businesses who are increasingly under pressure, for schools and universities. All of these institutions are struggling. They should look at Bitcoin.
It's so like, this is why, like, at the moment I'm very like, I just came off we ran a X Spaces called the Bitcoin Town Hall, and I was getting very hyped up on that because there's so many people taking action and actually coming out and saying they're into Bitcoin. But I think that's really important. What you said there is, like, everyone's working in different sectors as well, and potentially struggling sectors. So you've got Claire Chisholm at she was the UK's first school to accept Bitcoin as a form of payment, and she's creating a curriculum now for Austrian economics and working with Saifedean to do all of this. But it just took that one spark of coming out and saying, I'm into Bitcoin, I'm going to take action, I'm going to do something. And I'm seeing a lot more people do that. And I think it ties into what we were talking about around confidence and confidence to be able to speak out, which then becomes like a flywheel almost of taking action. More people then hearing about Bitcoin within different sectors.
Yeah. And I think it's really important that people recognize and understand fully in advance of buying Bitcoin that it is volatile. And, I will experience, so I've been in it for 6 years, and I've seen it go. I think I bought it the cheapest I bought it was at $3,000 or $4,000, and I've seen it go all the way up to $69,000 and then back to, what was it, $15,000, something like that. And I don't know what we are today, 100 plus, 100 and something. So it will be volatile, but the volatility is your friend. You just buy it and you hold it, and you can have confidence that nobody is ever going to make any more Bitcoin. And that's the thing that you cannot trust about fiat, because we know quite the opposite, that they will make more fiat. They will grow the money supply, and it will compound, and it will work against you. And that simply cannot happen in Bitcoin. And so put your confidence in terms of your reserves into Bitcoin, at least in part, at least get 10% of your reserves into Bitcoin, and give yourself a fighting chance of resisting the onward advance and devaluation of the currency that you operate in, whether that's pounds or dollars or euros. Really, there's very little to pick between them. You need some exposure to Bitcoin. And I think by doing so, we give ourselves an integrity in our foundation that enables us to build a platform for the future, so our businesses remain strong, our communities remain strong. And I think it's more important than people are recognizing. So I'm kind of not patient enough to put up with the it's a scam, it's a Ponzi, all of these lazy, silly criticisms that haven't been thought through at all. I understand why people might have those criticisms, because they probably just heard somebody else say it. But until you look at it yourself, I think you don't really understand how fundamental this technological development really is. This is a game changer.
It does require work. You're right. Like it requires putting in hours of unlearning what you thought as money, and trying to like flip your whole mindset around. The biggest like aha moment book for me was, again, Jeff Booth's one of, okay, so we live in an inflationary world, and what would it look like if it was deflationary? And that takes a lot to actually, it's turning your mindset completely 180 degrees and having to think about what the world could look like. But I think going back to what we were talking about at the start is like lots of people are just they're working all the time and they don't have time to actually, or are not carving out time to look into this, looking into finances. Quite in the UK anyway, you don't really talk about it. Just bury your head in the sand for a lot of people. But I want to get onto the business side of things now. Just quickly, you've integrated Bitcoin into your business. How did you find, like, you've been doing it obviously personally for years, but then how did you find the whole process of adding it to your balance sheet and doing this? Because a lot of people that I speak to get really confused and think it's really difficult. I just wanted to know what your experience with that.
That's an interesting question, because I think I found it harder personally in the beginning. So in the beginning, it was really difficult to move from pounds or dollars into any kind of cryptocurrency. And so that was quite a big hurdle to get over initially. When I started my business, which was in a year ago, 2024, June 2024, I deliberately chose a bank provider that would support Bitcoin purchases, because I knew what I wanted to do from the beginning. And so I'd really encourage every organization to think through their bank provider. And my experience is that some are much more hostile to Bitcoin than others. So think carefully if you want to do this, about maybe adding to your banking portfolio of providers so that you can save yourself a whole world of pain trying to demonstrate to a banking official or agency that you're allowed to do this, you know what you're doing. It's businesses that are longer established will have certain processes that they need to follow. So they might need board approval to sign off a treasury policy like this. So that obviously would be a more complicated thing than I had to experience as a startup, which was really easy for me. But I think nothing is insurmountable, and you just got to convince your board that this is what you need to do. This is the right thing to do for the long-term future of the organization. So technologically, it's really easy now. It couldn't be easier. And I actually found it easier as a business than I did personally when I first invested 6 years ago. And then even on the accounting side, I had one conversation with my accountant about this, who immediately got it, put it straight onto the balance sheet, and it's not marked to market. So I know the actual value of the Bitcoin is greater than what my balance sheet shows, but I mean, I'm very relaxed about that, and we could mark that to market if we wanted to at some point. For me, it'll just continue. While profits come in, I'll use some of those profits to accumulate as much Bitcoin as I possibly can. Hey, it's not, I'm not Michael Saylor. It's really small stuff. So, but that's fine. That's absolutely fine. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to come on here today, was to say to smaller businesses, to people that are just starting out, you can build this integrity, financial integrity into your business from day one. So instead of having to run at, max speed on the treadmill and still flying off the back, you can give yourself a fighting chance of making your business work. To me, I don't know if you ever think about this, but to me, I can't believe that more people are not up in arms about this 2% inflation target. It's like they just talk about it as if that's perfectly normal. Oh, that's a good idea. We'll have a target of 2% inflation. It's like, I'm sorry, what? You want to steal 2% of my stuff every year? You want me to think that that's a good idea? I'm amazed that more people don't question that.
So this is actually something that I think my friends and family kind of hate me for, because they'll be complaining about the price of something going up, and I'll just be like, well, that's how the money's designed currently. Like, it's going to do that if we're still printing more money. So it's just, it baffles me that we haven't learned this earlier, and in why it's not in schools and all of that. It's just like a fundamental thing of, but at the same time, but why do we actually have the 2%? Is kind of what you're saying. Like, yes, we should learn about it, why it's there, but at the same point, you should be questioning, well, why do we actually have that 2% target, which we hardly ever meet?
Yeah, right. And to me, that we're being gaslit. So, we are being told we're going to take at least 2%, and we know it's more like 7% if you use M2 money supply. So we know it's more like 7% as an average. And in some places it'll be higher than that, and some places it'll be lower than that. Some of the places I've traveled around the world, it's a lot higher than that. But let's just take 7%. So, and we're told a 2% rate by the central banks. We're not just told we're going to devalue the money that you've worked hard to save up. We've also been told, and that's a really good thing, you should be thanking us that we're taking 2% of your stuff because we're clever. To me, that's astounding that we would just quite passively accept that. And obviously, you don't need a particularly high level of mathematics to figure out that 2% over a sustained period of years devalues everything that you've got significantly. And people don't even ask, well, where does that 2% go? They just don't ask that question. And it's because we've just been told this is a good thing for us. This is, Big Brother loves you. We're here to help you. It's compassionate. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say they're like the mother that was buying the formula milk. Let's say they don't mean to be bad. But nonetheless, the result is the same. They're still poisoning us. And so we got to get ourselves out of that situation. The only way I figured out as you figured out, and as many of your viewers will have figured out, is that Bitcoin is the way we do this. And yes, I know in 6 months' time, if we're in a bit of a bear market, and let's say we've dropped from 150,000 down to 90,000, people will be crowing at me that, I was wrong and Bitcoin's dead. Well, I've, been on this roller coaster before, and I'm very comfortable where I am. So I'll be buying at 90 and I'll be buying at 150, whatever it is. One Bitcoin is one Bitcoin, and let's just keep accumulating as much as we can before everybody else gets in on the act.
That is, that's exactly how people need to be viewing it. And like, once you get to that level of understanding of Bitcoin, it doesn't really matter what price you're paying for it. And going back to your point around anyone can really be buying Bitcoin, and we're seeing on the news like billions getting purchased by corporate treasuries. But it's so important, and like that's why we've, as a business, we kind of moved direction of, in the UK, like 99% of businesses are SMEs. And they're the backbone of the UK. I'm seeing so many people leave the UK, move their businesses out of the UK. There was actually this morning, I can't remember what it was, but it was like the highest level of entrepreneurs, I think it was, leaving the UK. Obviously, tax situations and all of that. But on a smaller level, like, you are like showing how you can do it as a small business, a startup, and the importance of doing that to actually last the length of time and be able to continue to grow your business on a sound, solid foundation.
It's critical. It's hard enough to build a business. We all know the stats that most businesses fail in their early years. And so for me, the opportunity to purchase Bitcoin, I can't believe I'm allowed to just go and buy it for my business. It's fantastic. What a great opportunity that is. It's like buying Harry Kane when he's 17. It's like fantastic. It's great. Let me go buy it. I'll have some of that. Thanks very much. I don't know if are you familiar with the Cantillon effect from economics?
Yes.
So that, I think we're seeing that across the board in our country. So essentially, for your viewers, the Cantillon effect is economic theory from the 19th century. And so Robert Cantillon put in his theory that when the government prints money, essentially, this is me summarizing very crudely, but when the government prints money, it has an entry point into the economy. And so wherever that entry point is, all economic activity will gravitate towards that. And so you get certain sectors become bigger and bigger. You get certain institutions within those sectors become bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is the effect of fiat currency. And so the Cantillon effect is having its impact across our society. That's why you have mega institutions, huge corporations. Even in the charity world, you're seeing very large charities with their income go up and up and up and up and up. And small charities are absolutely breaking their backs just to break even. And it's because the larger institutions have the opportunity, and I don't blame them, but they have the opportunity to fund large grant writing teams who can work directly with the government to secure large government funds, because they've figured out where the entry point is into the economy of the money that's being printed. So, hey, let's pivot our activities to work a little bit towards where the money's being printed. Let's just say it's on, climate change, or let's say for a business, it's on the defense sector at the moment. So what you're going to see is, with all of the troubles in the world, militarily speaking, at the moment, you're going to see more and more businesses and consultants and firms move towards the defense sector, because that's where all the newly printed money is hitting the economy first. And so it all gravitates towards that. And the charitable sector, you've just seen huge growth in some of the largest charities. And then you see these community-based organizations that are small, that are grassroots, that actually know what's going on the ground, because they're there, they're working with people door to door, street to street in the community. And those guys are working in the organizations who struggle to even break even. And so the Cantillon effect, I think we're seeing it in real time, not just in business, but even in charities.
Definitely. It's just becoming more evident, and we're just being able to see it a lot more. And it's the same with, as the fiat system breaks down, it becomes more obvious. Because us in the UK, it's not that obvious, but if people in hyperinflated countries, then it's a lot more obvious, the broken fiat system. But yeah, we're starting to see that, I think, and people become aware of it as well, and the incentives around it.
And sometimes
awesome.
Sometimes we just don't see the cost as well. So I think I mentioned to you at the start, I visited an artisanal cobalt mine in the DRC last year, and it was a really super dangerous trip. You know, we got past 50 machine guns to get into this place. It was crazy, really. And we were completely unaccompanied. It was a wild trip. But the reason I went was partly is connected to this entire conversation, actually, because what happens is we outsource the ugliest parts of economic activity to places where we can't see. And so that enables us to kind of, you and I, to have a conversation on devices digitally that, you know, is all working really well this afternoon. And yet we know, and I saw it last year myself, there's kind of 40,000 children working in southern DRC digging cobalt out of the ground with their bare hands in lethal conditions to get the cobalt that goes into my device that keeps my battery cool while it's recharging. That's the manifestation of the fiat system. That's if you go down the layers enough, you end up in a cobalt mine in the DRC where 6-year-old children are working for no money, risking their lives every day to dig cobalt out of the ground so that it can go into my device. That's the outcome of the fiat system. And if you flip the entire thing on its head, you have the Bitcoin system, which promotes and elevates and takes people out of poverty. So I think the difference between the fiat system and the Bitcoin system, in my mind, that's a really stark example of it. You have a child in a cobalt mine. He's at the very bottom of the ladder of the fiat system. And then in the Bitcoin system, you've got all these people who weren't wealthy, but they realized that they were onto this revolutionary savings technology, and they just invested what they could in it. And now a few years later, their lives have been transformed with more security, better health, and better prospects for the future and their families because they invested in the right system. And so I guess the choice that my company, Start Bay, had to make was, what kind of system am I going to invest in? Am I going to invest in a system that leaves children down a cobalt mine at age 6? Or am I going to invest in a system that somebody like Michael Saylor, who was running a mid-level, US company, invested in and utterly transformed that company's future? What if I invested in Bitcoin? What if you invested in Bitcoin and switched from the fiat system that leaves kids in a mine in the DRC into a system that elevates and lifts people out of poverty and into security and prosperity for the future? That sounds like a pretty good deal to me.
It does. And that's how we came into this conversation. And that's such a good way to round off this conversation, because it's about making the world a better place. And it's not a billionaire's playground, or that's how it's perceived to be. But underlying, what happens when we get into a more Bitcoinized world is it's a better world. And yeah, it's just a lot of people don't see that side of things, and just see it as a number go up. But once you dig into it, we realize that, this does make the world a better place.
So true. It's so true.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story, sharing why you've started incorporating Bitcoin into your business. And yeah, it's just been amazing chatting with you. And if anyone ever wants to reach out to you, I'll put your details below so they can have a conversation with you. And yeah, I just thank you very much for saying yes to coming on.
Thanks for having me.